It's a great pleasure to appear before the City Club.
Join us, ask questions, and talk to the people who make New York what it is.
A New York City tradition.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Friday Forum of the City Club. The City Club is the 103-year-old civic organization that's continued its nonpartisan fight for intelligent and honest government throughout all that time. We have these luncheons at the CUNY Grad Center on West 42nd Street on a weekly basis. My name is Ed Tristram. I'm your host, and my first duty will be to bring up your moderator and excuse myself. The moderator for today's discussion on the new theater development on 42nd Street will be a member of the City Club, a person who's been doing development of one type or another on 42nd Street for quite a long time, for more years than I care to remember. Is that the formula? More years than anyone can care to remember. Please welcome Fred Papert.
Thank you, Ed. It's not-for-profit development, deliberately not-for-profit development, I should say. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm pleased to see a big crowd, and a little surprised, actually. The subject of 42nd Street has been discussed at press conferences and forums and rallies for at least the 20 years since we started it. We used to say that if you could get 50 cents for every broom thrust in Celeste Holmes' hands to announce the latest cleanup, you could rebuild the South Bronx and 42nd Street. So my hope today is that we will not rehash all the old debates. I think everybody in this room wants that wonderful 7th, 8th Avenue block, the city's brightest memory, to stop living like a bum. And I think we all are thrilled that after all the stops and starts, this project looks like it's about to happen. I'm hoping that the speakers or the questioners will get into some angles on this theme that have not really been explored as much as I think they should be. And for one, I want to remind you of something that Ed Koch said, 1979, when he first saw one of the grandparents of this present scheme called the City at 42nd Street. And he saw a model of it and thought it was a little bit glitzy, a little bit, if you'll pardon the expression, Disneyland-ish. And his line was, "New York is seltzer, not orange juice." Great Koch line. And so I think we all want to focus. I know that this gang does, on exactly what the 42nd Street that we rescue is going to wind up looking like. How, again, we can make it the heart and soul of New York. So I will move to, I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing this crowd because we all know them. This is more of a family gathering, it seems to me, in any event. Cora described herself and Rebecca and Gretchen as the 3 witches of 42nd Street. So I'll let that, actually they're the 3 aces of 42nd Street. And the borough president is our great borough president. So the order has been set for me. Having enough enemies, I did not take that on. And we will start with Gretchen Dykstra. Just in case you don't know about Gretchen Dykstra, the way to find out about Gretchen Dykstra is just to walk around Times Square. Times Square is about 900% better these days than it was before she began to run the Business Improvement District. She is a woman of extraordinary ability and persistence. So she will talk, each of the speakers will talk for 8 minutes, except Ruth, who deserves more and will get a few minutes more because she's our, she does, and then we'll take questions, I suppose.
Thanks, Fred. I actually think Cora said we were the good witches of Times Square. I think it's important to underline the good, yes. It's a pleasure to be back at the City Club. Some of you might remember that you last saw me when I was working with charter revision, and although I often tell Sally I will not relive those sad histories with the City Club, I did want to start by saying that it was some of your members that helped me understand that if people trust a process, you'll always end up doing better. and I, in fact, see my role as running the Business Improvement District in Times Square as partly a political job where we have to help New Yorkers and our neighbors in the tri-state area believe that Times Square is getting better, and therefore it's also the process that matters, as it does also, I think, in the management of business improvement districts. So I wanted to start, because of the nature of the City Club, talking about the Times Square bid's approach to the management of business improvement districts. I believe absolutely that neighborhoods that work together are neighborhoods that work, and that Times Square hasn't often been thought of as a neighborhood. It certainly has had many handles, but that's not one. And that, therefore, one of the roles that the bid could play is providing the glue, if you would, the cohesion to all of the organizations and the people who care so deeply about the future of Times Square. So I see myself as a community organizer with resources, with many, many thousands of constituents and bosses. I have a board of 46 members, which I think you'll all admit is a rather large board for a not-for-profit. There's an executive committee of 13 members that meets every month to help set policy and provide oversight. We have very active subcommittees. We have advisory committees, a marketing committee, a restaurant committee. We've recently set up a fence committee to take a look at DOT's median in the middle of Times Square. And a little later on, I'll tell you about the Consortium for the Times Square Homeless. We like to do things collaboratively in Times Square, and I think it's paying off if you believe, as I do, that collaboration is not an enemy of efficiency. What do? We are a quality of life bid. We have revenues in excess of $5 million. Yes, it's mandatory assessments on the 400 property owners in Times Square, as well as a pass-through to the 5,000 commercial tenants, which is another reason I think that it's very important to be democratic in the way you run a bid, because ultimately the people who pay that assessment are not necessarily the people in the front line of approving a bid. With those resources, we have 40 public safety officers, we have 53 sanitation workers. I think you've seen them all in their bright red jumpsuits. We have a homeless outreach team. We are the largest private contributors of the Midtown Community Court. We are the recipients of $1.5 million grant from the Times Square Public Purpose Fund, and we have just finished lighting all the side streets of Times Square. And yes, crime is down, cleanliness is up. We are having somewhat of an impact on homelessness, but I will return to that. We provide tourism services. We bring you Broadway on Broadway. We bring you New Year's Eve, and I think, in fact, it is true to say that Times Square is becoming a neighborhood. Now, I have spent a lot of my time recently on the question of pornography, and people say to me, and Fred referred to it, how can you have a vision of Times Square without any pornography? But in the hopes that the City Club will be an active discussant on these issues, let me tell you where we stand. We produced the negative impact study that the city is now using as the substantive justification for what the mayor and council member McCaffrey are calling for. It was our study that showed, documented using data from the Department of Finance as well as the police department, the negative impacts of the concentration of pornography. We've been able to show that there is a decrease in property value increases where you have pornographic stores. We were able to show that there is direct correlation between increased criminal activity and increased arrests where you are closer to the concentration of pornography. And we, of course, collected a lot of anecdotal evidence, which the courts, no matter what Norman Siegel says, the courts all around the country encourage the collection of anecdotal evidence. But it is true that we've also been able to quantify the negative impacts. The Times Square bid, because we care about process, dealt with this first at the committee level and then at the board level, and our position is that we care most about dispersing pornography, that you cannot ever allow a red light district to reconfigure itself somewhere else, that it is disastrous to both the neighboring residential communities and the commercial districts. We are obviously interested in the mayor's proposals. We have been looking closely at them. We are waiting to see the map that the Department of City Planning planning will reveal on what those manufacturing zones actually look like. And until we see that map, none of us know whether or not the mayor has overstepped, although that is part of the criticism out there. We believe absolutely that the public discussion has to continue, but the good news is that I believe that since the first time since 1977, we have a shot at legally and effectively regulating adult uses throughout New York City. And thanks to the fact that there is no longer a Board of Estimate, I think that the numbers, we've got the numbers on City Council to make this happen. So with that, I'm going to stop and just leave you with the fact that I think Times Square, there is a wonderful symbiotic relationship between the folks who care about bricks and mortar and those of us who care about the quality of life on the sidewalks, be it not-for-profits, business, or government, and it's all coming together so that Times Square, in fact, building on its roots, is getting better all the time without losing its heart and soul. Thank you.
When we first set up or created the 42nd Street Development Corporation, not-for-profit corporation, we heard about a survey that a European travel agent had done among prospective first-time visitors to New York. And they were asked if they had their choice, where would they want their hotel to be? And something like 62% said 42nd Street and Times Square. What did they know? There is a very, very real relationship between Times Square, which is that triangle that ends at 43rd Street, and 42nd Street. Times Square is, as I'm sure you all know, this city's #1 tourist attraction. And 42nd Street will be part of that, and 42nd Street remains, I think, the most famous street in the world. And that gives any new users from Disney, MTV, whatever, a great leg up, because there are going to be enormous numbers of people on the street. And the person that's going to wrestle them to the ground and get them there is the next person on the list, Rebecca Robertson, who is, among other things, a very, very quick study. She started as a planner at the planning department, and then she is metamorphosed into a real estate hustler of the highest order. Whatever's happening there, and when it all happens, it's Rebecca, I think, that will get more credit and deserve more credit than anybody. Rebecca Robertson.
When I first started on the 42nd Street project, one of the first people I was told I had to see was the great real estate hustler of all time, Fred Papert. So, you learn at the right meet. As Gretchen says, the rejuvenization of Times Square and 42nd Street are so closely linked. It's made such a difference to us that the Times Square BID has come along and really turned Times Square around. There were a lot of elements there to do it, but I think the marketing and the sanitation and the security forces, all those things that have happened over the last little while have really made it so much easier for us to market 42nd Street. There are a lot of things to discuss in 42nd Street, but this is primarily about the theaters, and I'd like to expand that to talk about not only the theaters but entertainment, because much of our new vision for 42nd Street has to do with going beyond the walls of our 9 beautiful historic theaters and extending the idea of entertainment throughout the whole block. We believe that by extending entertainment to the whole block, we can actually expand the city's notion of entertainment in Times Square by looking at new kinds of activities and focusing on a mix of live theater, of celluloid, of high-tech, and God knows beyond, that we can challenge and shake up the old ways of delivering entertainment on Broadway and perhaps attract new audiences and new people to come and see what's happening there. At the heart of the 42nd Street project, there are these 9 theaters that made 42nd Street famous. They are the inspiration of our new vision. But I think for a long time, it was very difficult to understand what to do with them. In the mid-'80s, the plans for these historic theaters really languished. In 1985, there was a developer for the theaters who was de-designated, and no substitute plans were introduced. There was a committee that looked at what to do about the 2 required not-for-profits and set up some structures that ultimately, in fact, were used. But again, there were no specific tenants identified at that time. It was also difficult because I would say that by the mid and late 80s, it was clear that the original plan for the not-for-profit theaters, i.e. the commercial theaters, which was to turn them into Broadway theaters, was perhaps infeasible. Broadway had a number of dark theaters, still does, and these theaters were older and more obsolete, and they hadn't had repairs in decades, and they simply, with one exception, are not competitive with the Broadway scene. So the theaters were really having some problem finding their way, although I think everybody agreed that they were really what the project was all about. In the late 1980s, recognizing that there was some special expertise that was required to bring the theaters to life, and in order to provide a perpetual guardian for these theaters, the state and the city established an independent not-for-profit entity whose task was to fill the theaters forever, not just for the next few years, but for the next time 42nd Street goes through another phase, you know, after being the great entertainment mecca, which I hope it'll be over the next 5 to 10 years. 25 years from now, it'll go through something else, but it's still going to be important that these theaters are looked after and that there's a group whose life is dedicated to doing that. In 1990, we were lucky enough to have Marion High School accept the chairmanship of that group, and Cora, who you'll be hearing from, the presidency. In the meanwhile, the state took title to 9 of the 13 acres of the project with the $241 million provided by Prudential. The sites that we took included not only the office sites, but in some ways, very importantly, the 8 theaters and 3 mid-block parcels that were sandwiched between these theaters. We stabilized the theater's condition. They weren't great. We increased security and improve the maintenance, I hope, vastly. In the meantime, the new 42, which was this new not-for-profit entity, took a lease on 6 of the theater sites. The New Amsterdam and the Harris remained in the hands of the Nederlanders, and the Empire Theater, which was supposed to be part of the Mart, ultimately was kind of in limbo land. By 1992, there was a downturn in the city's real estate market, and we needed a revised strategy to bring the project area to life quickly and immediately. For us, it was an opportunity to expand this idea of entertainment to include not just the theaters, but the rest of the block as well. In summer of 1992, Robert Stern and Tibor Kalman and a host of other talented designers and planners were hired to create a new vision for the block that focused on tourism and entertainment. By 1993, they completed their plan. It was replete with the razzmatazz that 42nd Street deserves. Well, on the eastern sites, the plan would be only interim, 10 to 15 years. The plans for the rest of the block are permanent. It calls for lights and signs and expanded entertainment uses and retail uses, things that will keep the block hopping 18 hours a day. Also in 1993, we acquired the New Amsterdam Theater from the Nederlanders. We paid the princely sum of $273,000 for what turned out to be, just in the first year, a $650,000 liability. The theater hadn't had heat for 10 years. The roof was wide open. But many say, or many at the time, thought it was perhaps a bad economic deal for us, but as we know, it may just turn out to be the best deal we ever made. The new Stern plan attracted retailers and entertainment companies that had never really given us a second look, and that included Madame Tussauds, with whom we're in negotiations right now. And then in spring of 1993, Robert Stern took Michael Eisner to the New Amsterdam Theater. Eisner was looking for a theater. He was going to open Beauty and the Beast at the Palace, but I think he was interested in finding his own home. He had been asked to come to the street many times before and had refused for, I guess, what were obvious reasons. Anyway, Bob Stern twisted his arm and he came to the theater, fell in love, and we began 9 months of very hard and difficult negotiations with the Disney group. In February of this year, we announced a memorandum of understanding with Disney to go ahead, restore the theater, and to use it for their theatrical productions, of which Beauty and the Beast was the first. We are greatly cheered by the fact Beauty and the Beast is doing extremely well, because it bodes well for our negotiations with Disney. We're right now completing our final negotiations with them, and we hope to sign this lease very quickly. Hugh Hardy is the architect for this phenomenal theater, and it's I know he's here. And as we see these drawings come together, and as we start to understand, peel off the layers of paint, I can only tell you that every time I go into that theater, it's more miraculous. And I would invite any of you to call, because you've got to see it before Hugh works his magic, so you can see the before and after. In the wake of the Disney announcement, interest in the theaters and the non-theater mid-block parcels grew exponentially. Cora's going to tell you about some of those. Cora, the city, and the state are presently negotiating with a major entertainment company for 3 theaters and 4 non-theater parcels on the south side of the street. Cora will tell you more about what's going on the north side of the street. Then in May of this year, we expanded entertainment just a little more along the mid-block by releasing an RFP for hotel development at the western end of the site that requires that the developers also present an entertainment concept. This particular site has 400 feet of frontage along 42nd Street, and it's very important that entertainment be a key part of it. We've shortlisted the bidders, and their proposals are due on January 15th. Our goal is to make this street the entertainment venue of the 21st century. It should be a place where all stripes of New Yorkers and tourists flock, where there's a mix of high and low culture, of ethnic diversity, and of New York and the world. We found much to our pleasure that popular entertainment and tourism form the natural economic niche for this street. And while it has a ways to go, I believe that we're very close to seeing the deuce take on a whole new meaning. Thank you.
Have all of you or most of you been to the Joyce Theater down on 8th Avenue? Well, you should go. It's one of the great accomplishments of New York. An old abandoned movie theater became perhaps the best small dance theater in the world, and the person responsible for it is the next speaker. And I'd like to think that that was where she trained for her present job, which is to come and turn the derelict, misused, underused, great theaters of 42nd Street into vibrant, magnetic places. And in fact, she's running ahead of this curve because she's got a theater already in construction. It's the great Victory Theater. It used to be the Belasco Theater in its original incarnation, and it's going to come back to us all as a theater for children. A nice, a youth, I think is the word we use, a nice kind of in-your-face move to all those bad users that used to fill that 7th 8th Avenue block. 7th 8th Avenue block on 42nd Street used to be far and away the largest repository for chicken and chicken hawking, a very nasty form of prostitution between little young boys and older men. And I think the idea of making the first step on the street a theater for children is a nice symbolic suggestion about what's to come. So here is my favorite theater builder and another real estate hustler. We're all real estate hustlers over here. Cora Cahan.
I'm at a disadvantage being the shortest person to speak. Thank you, Fred. The Joyce wouldn't have been built if I hadn't had a very critical talk with Fred Papert. And I was sent to Fred Papert by Hugh Hardy. So everything comes round once again. And here we are at the City Club, and I'm very happy to be here. The new 42nd Street, I guess you now know quite a bit about it, is a not-for-profit organization that was established and came into being just about 4 years ago. And I think the reason the city and state decided at that point to found a not-for-profit organization to be responsible for the historic and precious theaters on 42nd Street was to make sure that there was a group that would not be subject to the exigencies of the political sector, and that would not be subject to budget changes or administration changes, and perhaps looked at the Lincoln Center Inc., Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts model as the closest paradigm they could find for an organization that would be responsible for a group of theaters, and that we happen to have one right in New York, although Lincoln Center is no 42nd Street. So here we are 4 years old, we're a not-for-profit group, we have 27 members of our board, and as Rebecca said, Marion High School is the chairman of that board. And when we came to the street in 1990, just as the real estate market was beginning to go over the edge, we said, who are we? What are we here for? What can we do? What is possible? And how do we affect any change on this street that is being pulled into a state, it's slipping into a kind of deeper blight as we sit around this table today. And we took a year to understand who we were, what we might do and how we might do that. And fortunately, those who came before us and forged our organization were able to make certain that there would be not-for-profit presence on the street, and made certain in the lease with Times Square Center Associates, who are building the office buildings on the four corners of 42nd Street and Broadway, to make sure that there was some money provided for the renovation and operation of two not-for-profit theaters on 42nd Street. And therefore, we said, we have the raw materials of these black holes, these theaters, these negative spaces at the moment that yearn to be brought back to life. And we have the $18.2 million provided through that lease to be used for those not-for-profits. Let's find some way. And this was in 1991, when no one believed for a moment that any change was possible on this street, when no one was coming to seek a theater except operators of would-be, maybe, discos and mud wrestling clubs. These were the only people who were interested in these magnificent spaces in 1991. And so we were wondering if there was any way to turn this around. And the board of the new 42nd Street charged the staff of the new 42nd Street with developing 3 not-for-profit models and exploring what they might look like. We did that, and the board chose to move forward with a Theater for Youth, New York City's first Theater for Youth. Fred, the reason we don't say children is because on a trip I made out to Minneapolis, where there is a 25-year-old theater known as the Minneapolis Children's Theater, the director of that theater, a man named John Cranny, said, whatever you do, Cora, if you really are going to go forward with this, do not call it a children's theater, because once they're 9½, they will not want to come. And I'm having to look for discos to do teenage works off-site, because these kids in Minneapolis come to this theater from the time they're nursing until they're 9½, when they want now to go to a grown-up theater. And so we took that very much to heart, because we felt that as a part of making a theater for youth, we were going to target and try to attract in any way we can come up with the kids who are 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 years old in the city, who never have reason to go into a theater to see live dance, live music, live opera, live puppetry, live artists talking to them about their work. And that's what we plan to have happen in the Victory. So we are calling it New York City's first Theater for Youth. It will be in the Victory. It is, as Rebecca said, underway. The demolition and excavation is complete. It is down to its sinew and a little bit of historic fabric. Hugh Hardy, our master theater builder, is once again the architect for the second most beautiful theater on 42nd Street, the Victory, which was built, by the way, in 1900 by Oscar Hammerstein's grandfather, Oscar Hammerstein. And 2 years later, David Belasco bought it from Oscar Hammerstein. It will be absolutely beautiful. It will sit directly across the street, if you have your site plan, from the New Amsterdam and the Disney Theater. And we couldn't be more pleased at the notion that we won't be the only theater happening on 42nd Street, which was what we imagined at the time we made this decision. In terms of other uses on the block, we also came to understand what Rebecca mentioned, the fact that although the original notion for these theaters, part of those plans and studies and plans and studies of the plans and plans of the studies that Fred made reference to, that took place in the decades before we came to 42nd Street, we knew that the idea that these would be legitimate or Broadway theaters was probably not such a wise notion. That we needed these theaters to be lively, dynamic, vibrant, open all day, that the mix of uses be going on year-round, day and night, week after week, and so that the theater had the theaters brought people to the street all times of the day, all times of the night, all the time. And Broadway theaters, curiously, are really only open from 8 until 11 if it's a long play, and on Wednesdays and Saturday afternoons, and once in a while on a Sunday daytime. That does not promise liveliness. And Broadway theaters are subject to a very fickle marketplace, hit shows and hit plays. That did not promise people on the street or activity in our theaters. So adaptive reuse had to be brought to bear. And entertainment-related uses seems like the most wonderful way of reinventing 42nd Street as we get to the 21st century, so that it has all the life it had at the beginning of the 20th century, when it was the main drag for seeing theater, not only in New York, but probably in the country and probably around the world. What other street in the world, Hugh, has 9 theaters, averaging 1,100 seats each? I don't think another one anywhere in the world. So next door to the Victory, we are now we now have an exclusive negotiating period, an option on the Lyric, which is just adjacent to the Victory. And by the way, we're taking the tenement building behind the Victory and retrofitting it as decent and dignified dressing rooms for the artists who will perform in the Victory. The Victory has no dressing rooms, so we will have some very dignified dressing rooms, and they will be on the back side of the Victory in the tenement building, which is actually on 43rd Street. So the Lyric, the Times Square, and the Apollo are under option to MTV. MTV is an affiliate of Viacom. Viacom recently acquired Paramount, and Viacom is one of the largest entertainment companies in the world and is establishing its headquarters here in New York, here on Times Square, here 2 blocks north of 42nd Street. And I think in part because the bid has done such a fabulous job, not only on 42nd Street, so people didn't think we were so insane to bring youth to 42nd Street, because Gretchen has been there first to make it clean and safe and lively, but because the whole Times Square bow tie area is now a compelling place to do business, and a compelling place for Bertelsmann to be, and for Viacom to want to be across the street. So Viacom looked out their window, saw 42nd Street to the south, and said, aha, a place to put MTV World Headquarters with a studio complex that will be open to the public all day and well into the night, with bright lights, lots of sound, and that audience of 15 to 26. I think once you get to 26, you've got to change channels. But 15 to 26-year-olds worldwide, again, their audience is 250 million viewers, and they are very excited. I saw them yet again yesterday. They are so keen, so revved up about this project and establishing MTV headquarters in a very brash and glitzy and bold and vital way that it's going to be hard to stop them, I hope. The Selwyn Theater, just adjacent to the Apollo, is so far available. We are holding it currently as a potential site for not-for-profit, for a second not-for-profit, for we are eager to have a second not-for-profit selected for 42nd Street. And once we determine what happens with the theaters on the north side of the street and see what develops with the theaters that are currently on an exclusive negotiating contract as well on the south side of the street, we will know what sites are available and usable and suitable for not-for-profit use, and we're hoping sometime in the next 12 months to decide and select on that second not-for-profit. So just to finish up, we are very excited about everything happening on this block. We are facing, as Fred said, this is the moment when the street is about to change. I have to say that if Rebecca hadn't been at the U.D.C. and at the 42nd Street Development Project all these years, we probably would not be having this conversation today. She is not only a real estate hustler and a city planner, but a visionary, and she knows how to make a deal. And so we are fortunate to have been come in here at the new 42nd Street after Rebecca had plowed the fields on 42nd Street before us. And so we are excited about the reinvention of the street and the reclamation of the theaters, the reclamation of the theaters on 42nd Street. Thank you.
It's not so easy to introduce my favorite borough president because she has this extraordinary body of work. So I've decided to encapsulate her career with one project that seems to me to demonstrate her vision and her leadership and her courage. And so I'm pleased to present to you the public official who saved the 42nd Street trolley, Ruth Messinger.
Fred, I actually thought of an infinitely greater one-sentence introduction after the presentations of Gretchen and particularly of Rebecca and Cora. So I will present myself. I am not a real estate hustler.
Very good.
I want to go back to Fred's early introduction. I will make a serious effort not to take extra time because I know less about the 42nd Street issues than you've heard from my three distinguished colleagues. I get to comment on some of what they've said, recognizing them as the experts, and I'm hoping that there is time for questions and that the questions broaden out to some other perspectives on what we're all talking about, and that might be a place that I'd like to play. So I want to first make a comment actually that comes very close to where Cora ended up, and that is the 42nd Street and Times Square site is the most critical and significant site we have in this city for the right kind of development. Now, you can make that argument, and I probably have, I'm embarrassed to say, said something just that sounds too much like that about perhaps 2 or 3 sites. But be clear that a significant future for this city's economy is tourism, one of the areas least well developed by several prior administrations, and in too many ways regularly foundering and coming a cropper. And when you think about tourism, there are all kinds of innovative things you can do. Many of them are happening out of my office, and I'm very proud of them. But if there's a place that people around the world think of when they think of New York, it is Times Square, it is 42nd Street in their various prior incarnations. And so for years, it has really been a horror for the city that when people came here and went to see that place they thought was the center of the world, it wasn't there. And what was there instead was really horrible and affirmatively scary to tourists and to New Yorkers, and kept giving us a bad name. So the ways in which we recreate Times Square and 42nd Street, I believe, are critical to our capacity to plan and do the right thing, our ability to keep, to use a conventional expression, pushing the envelope, so we keep thinking about what else we might need to do for the next decade and the next century, and how inclusive we can be in regard to our planning. Having said that, let me make a couple of comments. I want you all to be sure you all heard not only several statements about what the Business Improvement District work in Times Square has meant to the quality of life in Times Square, which is without any question a thumbs up, but what Gretchen said about the process they have used. Because the City Club will regularly, does regularly, and right now in the current climate will regularly be asked about and challenged to think about things like additional business improvement districts and other entities like them. And what matters is the commitment to process that Gretchen talked about, the degree of inclusion, the necessity almost to have, what did you say, a 46-person board and lots of committees. It has been a delight in the Borough President's office for us to work with Gretchen, and we give her and ourselves a bad name by regularly telling other people who are trying similar enterprises that they should do it more like the Times Square bid, but in fact, it's a critical piece of the answer. Now, beyond that, I want to say 3 other things. The so-called interim plan, the notion of livening up 42nd Street, making that dreadful block from 7th to 8th Avenue a full part of the Times Square revival that is really an exciting place to be 24 hours a day, is critical to the future of that area. And I have said before, and so I will not say it at any length, but I have to at least say it once, it is the interim plan with its best aspects, should be the permanent plan for those corners, that block, and that intersection. There are plenty of places, and we are proving that, and you just heard a lot of examples, in that immediate area to attract businesses back, to fill existing vacant, sometimes new vacant office spaces. Let them fill up, but keep the life of the street as one of the top priorities, because we never want of course, we don't want a visitor to that area to see it the way it looked 5 or 10 years ago, but in my judgment, we also don't want a visitor to come to that block in that area and say, where is it? They'll feel better if they're not terrified, scared, and preyed on by chicken hawks. They'll feel safer, but something won't be there if we allow the area to become another site for relatively typical Manhattan large-scale development. That's point one. Point two, you have heard much about. It is the importance of the theater buildings themselves as historic sites, as buildings, and surely Hugh Hardy has captured this over and over again, that give a sense of New York in its fullest history, because they are preservation sites that are really quite magnificent, and because they convey this issue of the city as the center of a large theater arts, and broader cultural and entertainment industry. So it's important to keep and preserve the buildings and have the renovation and re-renovation of them take into account as much of the historic nature of the actual buildings as they were built and of their history in terms of what happened there as possible. And we need to be looking, as we fully develop the tourism plan for 42nd Street and Times Square, for ways to tell the theater history that is so critical to both our past, our present, and our future. The third point I want to make, I think, draws directly to that. And that is, as we renovate spaces, as we rebuild theaters, as we look for tenants who will bring this piece of glitz and that piece of entertainment, we have an obligation, in my judgment, because this is a public sector or partly public sector project, to keep thinking about the importance of cutting-edge theater. If this city is going to stay a theater arts, and entertainment center throughout the next century, then to be quite blunt, it cannot only build for and only produce and only have what happens to be popular this year. It's got to have that second not-for-profit live theater space. It's got to respond to the need from Broadway or would-be Broadway producers for a 499-seat theater. It's got to keep thinking about what are the new shapes and types of culture and cultural arts that right now, frankly, are finding, thank God for the ingenuity of New Yorkers, finding spaces and niches in underground basements in neighborhoods throughout all 5 boroughs that we don't know about. I just discovered that from the point of view of certain orchestra recorders and record makers, the best studio production space we have is in the basement of the National Institute of Arts building at 155th Street and Broadway, which is just extraordinary to me, the things I don't know after 20 years of prowling the streets of this city and investigating the sites. But those are the kinds of things we have to know about. Who needs that? When is the Spanish Theater in Queens going to be big enough to do a production at 42nd Street, and which space is it going to use? So keep in mind the importance of Times Square, the theaters, and 42nd Street as part of our present and our future for new waves of theater, for popular culture, for historic preservation, for the city's capacity to reinvent itself, and as a center for tourism, and we'll be okay.
Since Hugh was mentioned again, and since Sally never misses an opportunity to to push the City Club. It's beginning to sound like the Hugh Hardy commemorative luncheon. Hugh, Sally told me to tell you, is a member of the City Club too. So there. Now, I promised everybody I would be on my best behavior, and I'm going to be on my best behavior. I'm not going to say a word about anything. I'm going to leave it to you. I hope somebody will come back to this seltzer orange juice question, but maybe it's a question only in my sick mind. How do we go about questions? Do people just line up, or do they raise hands? How does it work? Okay, sorry.
Hello, my name's Jane Gross. I'm delighted to hear that so much exciting is happening on 42nd Street. Finally, I did hear one thing which made me nervous, or a combination of things. One is about the critical MTV space and about how really exciting and out there it's going to be. I hope you have something hard and fast in the contract about noise pollution in the street. The other thing I'm hearing, and I'm wondering what your follow-up will be, is you've now given over a critical 5 out of 9 theaters to people under 25 years old. That's the 3 taken over by Viacom MTV, the Kiddie Theater at the Victory, and the New Amsterdam. And I'm wondering, I know that the next block down has all of the good off-Broadway theaters for grown-up kinds of people. What are you doing about either getting the grown-ups through Kittyville to get to the grown-up theaters, or turning over the rest of it and saying, hey, we have to deal now with the rest of the age span of this city because not all tourists and not all people are under 26?
A good question.
Well, I'll attempt. We do not think of it as a kiddie theater, actually. We think that it's very important that we develop an audience so that there is an audience in the future for theater in this city, with its not only 34 theaters in the Broadway district, which are for grown-ups, but also its wide range and broad-based resident theater companies, whether it's in the 5 boroughs or in New York City, whether it's the Public Theater at Lincoln Center or the Playwrights Horizon on 42nd Street or Manhattan Theater Club on 55th Street or Intar or the Spanish Repertory Theater. We have theaters all over the city for grown-ups. We have not one theater for youth. We certainly must have an audience in the future in the city, or all those theaters are going to suffer terribly from their aging audience, core audience group right now. If you look at a theater and a membership in a not-for-profit theater around town, you can tell that this audience is not growing, is not burgeoning, and if we don't begin to plant the seeds for an audience for the future in the city, we will lose our place as the theater capital of the world. So that is the reason we are so intent on getting young people to 42nd Street. And also, the notion, and I think it may have been Rebecca who said, the symbolism of having young people on 42nd Street coming to wonderful and strong and activities that mean something to them. And the music is one way that we really can get to the hearts and souls of the youth of our city. And so we think that MTV is a wonderful use. There will be activities for the grown-ups on this street in the theaters for certain. It's interesting, though, isn't it, that the uses that are first coming to the street are for younger people. I think that's fabulous. And I think that all around 42nd Street, there are wonderful theaters, not-for-profit and commercial, for the audience that has been developing for a long time in the city, and they are not our first concern at this moment. There'll be places for them on the street.
I agree with you.
Let
me just share with you my long-standing vision of what will be the measure of how successful this rescue of 42nd Street is. If at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning you feel blue, and you come down to 42nd Street, there will be a jazz club or a comedy club or a dessert bar or a revival house multiplex or something that will keep you occupied and contented. I think that it would be, 42nd Street, in my judgment, in my geriatric judgment, could never be a repository for only young people, in my view. I think it really has to be an eclectic mix of popular uses, some version of the Hubert's Flea Museum that used to occupy it, all these surprising, mysterious, unpredictable things, and I think it's a Hubert's Flea Museum. Next question, sorry.
Actually, could I just add to that, though, Fred? One of the points of expanding the idea of entertainment from the theaters to the mid-block parcels, a lot of the uses that you're talking about don't really work that well in theaters. they weren't built for theaters. Jazz clubs, we've talked to lots of jazz clubs, they really don't work in a 1,200-seat theater. One of the things we're excited about with the hotel proposal and other non-theater parcel proposals is precisely that you've got to push entertainment in every form, and I think you're going to find those are more likely to produce these smaller, non-originally theatrical uses.
Bear in mind what Cora said originally, a live theater, the most successful live play is lit 32 out of the 168 hours in the week. Now, you can get away with that at Lincoln Center and maybe at 45th and 46th Streets, but I think if you do that on a street that ends with a bus station and 8th Avenue, you're going to have trouble. So I think one wants to think about what Cora said, which is uses that draw people to the street around the clock. Next question.
Yes. My name is Joe Green. In addition to the New Amsterdam Theater, how important is Disney Corporation to the development of 42nd Street? And are they going ahead with their plans now that there's some confusion at the top of Disney?
I think that Disney's important. It's because they're an anchor. I mean, they made people look at the street and believe in the street. Second to the new 42. They're very important. We are actually working on our final documents right now, and my hope is that in some small amount of time we'll be able to announce a sort of their final deal with them. They've moved ahead expeditiously on doing the plans, and they seem very keen on doing it. And Beauty and the Beast is doing very well, and that's of course a big factor. So we have our fingers crossed. It is the best theater in New York, and they are getting it for a good deal. So.
The New Amsterdam, incidentally, has a roof garden theater. It used to be the theater that Florence Ziegfeld invited all his customers after the Ziegfeld Follies to stay in, and that, as Hugh, to bring him back into this, will attest, would make a great 499
My question, though, was in addition to that,
transfer house.
Does Disney have other interests besides the New Amsterdam Theater, and how is that going?
Yeah, they have bid on the hotel site, which in your little handout is Site 7. They're among 4 teams that are bidding. That is all that they've shown interest in. And actually, we've asked if they've had more interest, and they don't appear to be. That seems to be their interest. And they are only a partner in that.
Thank you. Raquel?
Hello. I am assuming that other than pedestrians, people will come by mass transit. And I just wanted to know what the realistic status is of the subway improvement and the light rail system.
As part of the agreements that we signed with Prudential and Park Tower this summer, part of those agreements related to the subway, and we have a deal whereby out of the revenues from the office development, the MTA will be reimbursed for costs, for about 50% of the cost of the renovation of the subway. The MTA has prepared the design, or has authorized funds for the design phase of the renovation of the subway station. They seem to be a little blocked right now, but it was authorized last June to go ahead with the renovation of the station. As far as we know, it's not been cut.
Just for your information. Gretchen.
The Bids Capital Committee just met with the MTA last month, and in fact we're helped by Don Clinton of Cooper Robertson. We got both good news and bad news at that meeting. From our perspective, with again Don's help, we think the redesign of the 42nd Street complex is a far greater improvement over the first one when Prudential's money was still on the table. That's the good news. The bad news is we were told point blank that they do not plan on beginning any construction except for an interim entrance until the next 5-year plan is approved. So although the $70 million is saved, we still need another $60 million to do it right, and they're not even going to start until they've got the whole pot. So we are not very happy or hopeful.
I would only add that I think that this is true for, unfortunately, Gretchen's second point is true for mass transit planning and improvement throughout the Borough of Manhattan and the City of New York. The combination of cuts made from the city to the MTA in the last 2 administrations and the nature of the battle between the MTA and the city over capital money means that most of the stations that were slated for absolutely essential renovation, if you expect that people will continue to use mass transit to get around the borough, have been pulled. And in a somewhat odd move, the mayor this week put dollars back into the subway capital plan, but only for the Main Street station in Flushing, and specifically not for Times Square, 34th Street and 8th Avenue, Rockefeller Center, or 72nd Street and Broadway.
Just for your information, the other end of 42nd Street, the 8th Avenue end, had a subway station that was the most dangerous, the most derelict in the city when we started, and you should go down and see it now. All on his own, Peter Stengel has managed to get that into one of the better subway stations, and I want to put in a plug for Stengel because I think he's one of the great heroes of the city, but he's doing that job. And since I think Raquel asked the question with a sweet purpose in mind, the 42nd Street trolley would be, light rail system would be privately financed and would make a nice, easy, clean, quiet way to get back and forth on the street, and I think that would help some too.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel.
Hello, I'm speaking on behalf of the artists who work and both live and work in Times Square and have done so for over 10 years, and whose lives are being affected, to say the least, on many levels by the 42nd Street development project. I appeal to you all as moral and hopefully humane beings that do indeed have a vision and take into integral consideration art as a profession and make it one of your main objectives and priorities to work with us. I believe, Gretchen, your words, symbiosis and collaboration, to listen to our voice as an essential part of the true heart and soul of New York.
Thank you.
My name is Bob Leone. I'm the project's director of the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and I was wondering if there is some place here for an organization like the Hall of Fame, which for 12 years now has been seeking a site for its museum. And although we've been offered locations in Lenox, Massachusetts, and Savannah, Georgia, would very much love to stay in New York, the home of Tin Pan Alley and the Brill Building and Broadway.
Can either Gretchen or Rebecca answer that in 30 seconds?
Have you talked
Best
to
thing
David?
is for you to come see us.
Will do. Okay.
And you should talk to David Singer, who's developing a not dissimilar plan. Maybe you can join forces.
Okay, thank you.
I think, I'm sorry to say, I think we've come to the end of the trail. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank our moderator, Fred Papert, and the wonderful panel today. This is the Friday Forum of the City Club of New York. You're invited to come and visit us, participate in these conversations. Give us a call at 921-9870. It's a lot of fun, and we could use the input from more New Yorkers. Thanks, everyone. And this is Friday Forum of the City Club.